What's up everybody, welcome to Balkan Moto. Today we're continuing with disassembling the V45 engine. Okay, so now that we have the engine on the table, let's start taking things apart. So before we dig into the internals, let's take everything off that can be taken off that's currently attached to the outside. So I believe these tubes here can be taken off. There's some oil tubing here that has bolts on it that we should probably take off. The exhaust headers can be taken off. There's more tubing on this side. Maybe some brackets down here, it seems. So yeah, let's start taking those things off and move on from there. I have some progress. I took off the coolant lines that were into these holes here and here and here and here. They were just held in by the little brackets that went into these holes. And then they just have O-rings that kind of set them in place. Next on the list is I've undone this bolt here and this one here. And I just need to undo this and this. And I think there's another one on the other side. Yeah, this one. And I should be able to pull off that oil line as well. And then we're gonna do the coolant line that's running from here and all the way to the bottom. In the meantime, I did pull up the rubber cap on this device here, which I believe is the transmission gear position sensor. And I believe I could just use a wrench to just take this off. So I'll pull this off just to move these cables out of the way. Oil lines are off. Onto this coolant line, I believe. What it is, I think it's this piece here is welded. So if you look down here, it's welded. So I think that's kind of part of the block, but let's undo this bolt and this bolt and see if this comes off and separates from it. I took off one side of that pipe that was here, and there's still coolant fluid in the engine, which kind of surprised me, and it started leaking kind of all the way down here and stuff. So I'm just going to use this squeeze bottle to extract as much of it as possible. Okay. I'm guessing it's probably the same idea up there. So let's keep using this to grab as much of it as possible. I also took off the sensor that was here. Kind of an interesting sensor. I'm not sure what it does, but maybe it's oil pressure? Yeah, not sure. Let's keep going. Let's take this off, if I can. Yeah, I should be able to. There we go. There's more fluid on that side. There's that piece. Suck that up. Okay. All right. Let's get these hoses and the exhaust off, and maybe we'll turn it around to see if we can take anything off from the other side. The hoses on the back and the exhaust are off, and some interesting observations here. So this is the exhaust header that was on the right side of the bike, and this is the left. and this is the left. The interesting thing is that both have been modified at the bottom, and these extra pieces have been welded on. Kind of understandable, because even on the other bike, the bottom pieces of these are very thin, and over time with the heat, they just completely degrade and crumble. So that makes sense, but the way it's been welded is definitely a DIY job. The other thing that I noticed on the left bank, that would be cylinder 1. There's a lot of black oil on the exhaust header, so that cylinder was probably completely done. You can even see it on the little heat gasket. Okay, I turned the engine around, and the pipe actually seems to not be welded, but rather attached with the bolt right here, and then this hose is keeping it in place. So if I remove the hose, I should be able to remove the pipe, and then I can probably remove this entire what is that, water pump, and probably get rid of, actually I can probably remove this cable, take it off. It's going, what is this? This is the main relay, so that's probably the starter solenoid down there. So let's take this guy off. All right, the last coolant pipe is gone. I also took off the cable for the starter, I believe that is. And now let's remove this cable, which is the transmission position, by taking off these two bolts and taking off the entire sensor from here. All right, the transmission sensor is off, and it actually works in a very interesting way. So this was the sensor pretty much, and all it has is this little drive shaft at the back with a little pin on it. And I'm pretty sure the way this works is, depending on which way it's pointed, it gives a signal to the different every one of the 7 cables, identifying the gear it's in. And if you look in here, that little pin would fit within this guy, and that will rotate accordingly as you change gears. So that's pretty straightforward. Next, since we're still on this side, let's remove the what is this, the RPM speed sensor cable. So to do that, we're just going to remove the cover on this side, which is just these what is it, 2, 4, 6 bolts, and we're going to take that off. Once that's off and this cable's off, we're going to focus on taking off the water pump, and slowly move our way over to probably disassembly here. Then once that's off, we're going to take a look at the other side and taking off the side cover on the other side. All right, took the cover off. In order to take off that speed sensor though, the sensor is attached behind the cover, so I need this to come off. Now in order to take that off, a whole bunch of other things I believe need to happen in order to do that. So what I tried to do is crank it from the center shaft, which ended up cranking essentially the entire engine. And since this thing has been sitting, the front 2 cylinders are actually filled with water. So since I don't have the spark plugs, every time a cylinder came back up, it spit out a bunch of water. That's why it's so wet here. Okay, so that's fine. I will get back to disassembling this at a later time, since I'm pretty sure that's probably the last bit that needs to be taken out. So for now, let's focus on taking off the water pump and disassembling this portion here. See if we can take that off afterwards, because I'm pretty sure, yeah, there's a gasket here, so this entire left side of the engine should be able to come off. Okay, water pump is out, and this is what it looked like. So this was on the outside. On the inside you just have pretty much a flow compartment. Those were the 4 bolts, 2 bolts that held it to the crankcase and 2 bolts that held the lid on. And this is the actual pump. This was the inside of the engine, and on the outside is just a propeller. So as the insides made it spun, this would build pressure and pump coolant up through the system, up this way and then into the other containers, and eventually draining down back to here and then pumping it out. Okay, so that's out. Now let's loosen up these, take this bracket off, and I think that's it. And this should be able, and this guy, and this should be able to come out. Figured I'd show this as it's pretty cool. So right now the bike, the engine is technically in neutral, so I can spin this freely. And you can see that the shaft here is almost vertical. So if we were to there we go, so now it's in first and the thing turned over. If we want to go up in gears, there we go, that's second. Third, fourth, fifth, pretty cool. So this thing actually rotates as you kind of, you can kind of see. If I try to drop the gears now, there we go, now we're back to neutral. Cool. Alright, the output gear case is out, and this is what the back side of it looks like. So there's one of these universal wheels there that is essentially getting hooked up to the crankshaft there, which then goes back to the back, and then that hooks into that case at the back to the other diff. On the other side, you kind of saw what it looked like before. But yeah, so I think these 4 bolts here are holding in this piece with the crank, and then on the engine we have this hooked up to the gearbox. There's the pin that drives the clutch, and then we have the gear shifter. So this side is pretty much done. I have to see if any of this actually comes out. Maybe. We'll see. We might need to open the other side in order to pull that out. So, okay, I think on this side we're more or less done. Now to rotate to the other side and start opening up this crankcase and taking off the clutch and the assembly on the other side. Okay, this we've seen before, but once you loosen up all the bolts, take a rubber hammer and just bang the shit out of it. This is a good spot to hit. This is a good spot. This spot and this spot. Eventually it will loosen up to the point where you can just kind of take it off. Now, all the manuals and things say do not use a screwdriver to do this in it, or at least not to use a screwdriver to do the loosening. In my case, I'm not using this engine as an actual engine anymore, so if I damage it a little bit, it's fine, but for the most part, this is off. So let's take it out and see what state the clutch is in. This is a little unexpected. I guess on the 1983, the way the clutch assembly works is a little different. So this doesn't have bolts. It'll be interesting how we're gonna take that off. The clutch plates look fine. There's this assembly. This guy used to come off pretty easy on the 82 model, but here it looks like it will be very difficult to take that off. Either way, how is the sensor attached to? A bunch of these cables and this. Okay, so let's take off these sensors so we can take off the cable and not deal with that anymore. And we'll see what we're gonna do next. All right, so we have the side of the engine open. Now let's remove this guy right here, as well as disassemble this and take off the clutch components. In order to do that, we actually need to lock the engine from spinning, because if I just tried to spin this, I'll spin the entire engine around. So, like so. So I'll need to lock the engine in place so it doesn't move. In order to do that, we'll have to find a clever way to do that. The manual says to put it in 6th gear and hold the rear brake in place, but since the engine is completely out of the bike, that's not really an option. What we might do is I might just hold on to the bolt on the other side on the drive shaft, not the drive shaft, the crankshaft, so to stop the engine from spinning, and then loosen this guy. But let's get rid of this and potentially these guys here, because they seem to be pretty straightforward. And then we'll figure out how to get this guy off. Starter gear is off. The 3 bolts that had held this particular gear on are off. The 2 brackets that were here holding the sensors in place are also off. Now, looking into things a little bit further, in order to undo this one, I tried shifting the bike into 6th gear, but I'm still able to spin the entire engine over. So I'll have to literally block it on the other side so that the engine can't turn over. In order to remove these guys, this is actually a little bit simpler on the 1983 model versus the 1982 model. On the 82, there was 5 bolts here. Here, it's just the circlip clip that I need to remove. And then this all should start coming out from that point on. So let's get that off and see where we get. So after I removed the circlip clip, essentially what I had to do is take the clutch rod on the other side, this guy, and just kind of ram it a little bit in there, and that loosened things up, and there we go. So now at this point, I believe I might need to loosen this up with, again, holding everything in place, but progress nevertheless. Alright, so in order to remove this bolt, or lock nut and this bolt, my only option left, based on what it says in the user manual, other than obviously trying to hold it on the other side, is to literally use this hole right here and put a large screwdriver in to lock the teeth on the big sprocket in there. This should then allow me to turn these and untighten them. So let's see how that goes. I definitely don't recommend doing this if you're doing it on your own and you actually want a working engine. So let's see how that works. Okay, I loosened up this bolt and this was my solution. Lock the gears from this side with this massive screwdriver that actually got chipped. I don't know if you guys can see that when I tried to put it in there. So at least in here, I mean, it still got bit into, but at least it allowed me to undo it. Now, before I take this off, I should probably loosen this guy and the other one on the other side, because if I take this off, I have no other way of holding things in place. So let's loosen this. Oh, and the other thing, with the ratchet, I also used the massive 1 1/8 to get significantly more leverage by doing this to it. So now let's do the same thing on there. I got myself some new sockets, in particular the 27mm one. is what this giant nut ends up being. So let's lodge that screwdriver back into the sprockets and undo this. All right, the clutch assembly and the other sprocket on here for the crankshaft is off. This was actually quite simple to remove once I undid the lock nut. And in terms of what came out, here's the sprocket for the crankshaft, and here's all the components from the clutch assembly. So this little tiny guy was what was holding everything together. It had a washer behind it. These metal plates were kind of keeping this whole thing in place. Then you had the clutch plates, the the back of the clutch plates essentially, and then all that used to fit into this guy, which this actually kind of looks like a car clutch plate almost. But yeah, everything used to sit in this bucket. Well, the middle of it actually comes out. Yeah. It's a nice little that'd be pretty hard to put back in completely straight. Either way, so that's off. This side of the engine is pretty much ready for full disassembly. All right, so I managed to pull the main bolt on this side, and the interesting thing is that I need a special Honda tool to actually remove the alternator from the engine. If you look in here, you see there's a thread all the way in there where the bolt that was here was originally screwed into, and there's this other thread on here. So the Honda tool probably bolts onto this and pushes against this surface, pulling the entire thing out. I don't have anything like that on me, so I'll have to figure out some other way to get it out or order the tool from Honda. The peripherals of the engine are all taken off. And I think we're gonna call it quits for this episode. Make sure to subscribe, hit the little bell for notifications. Check me out on Instagram at Balkan Moto 2018 and check out balkanmoto.com. In next episode, we're gonna start opening up the top and taking off the alternator on the other side. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.